Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. I've got something pretty cool to show you today, folks. You may have heard of h0ffman and know a lot of his really cool projects. Most recently, he made a pretty big splash with his ports of a few Sega System 16 arcade titles, namely Shinobi and Golden Axe, to the Neo Geo. But he's worked on a host of other projects for several other platforms, including the game I'm going to show you here today. Join me for a look at Metal Gear for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. Oh, and a little side note, I created 4 of the musical tracks for this version of the game, so yeah, I'm still doing that too. First up, a brief history of Metal Gear. Really brief, I promise. Here in the US, a lot of us, myself included, got our first exposure to Metal Gear on the NES. And if you think NES Metal Gear was the original Metal Gear, well, you're wrong! No, the NES version came along second. That was a fact that many people in the West didn't realize until the release of Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, which included the MSX2 versions of Metal Gear and its awesome sequel, Solid Snake. The original Metal Gear for the MSX2 was famously created by Hideo Kojima, and his hatred of that NES version revealed many years later has become equally famous. He really doesn't like it, folks. Metal Gear was originally published on the MSX2 by Konami in 1987, but we wouldn't see an official release of that version of the game in the US until Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence was released at the end of 2005. That's just over 18 years later for those of you keeping score. Yep, at that point, Metal Gear was old enough to die for its country, but not drink a beer. One teeny little side note, though, the MSX version of Metal Gear did in fact get a contemporary English release in Europe. Alrighty, so that's enough history. Let's get on with seeing the game, shall we? Metal Gear for the Genesis / Mega Drive is a port of the MSX2 version of the game. The visuals closely resemble that version of Metal Gear, the map layout and gameplay are the same, and all that jazz. What's changed the most are some of the control options along with the music. h0ffman ported the code to the Genesis, and it's based on his Amiga port that he did a few years back. He also provided some credits to those who helped him in the README for this game. Now, as far as the music goes, some of the tracks were handled by Ice Dragon D, some by h0ffman, and some by me. The ending music is totally new, by the way. h0ffman composed his own song, which he used in that earlier Amiga port of the game, and I slaved over trying to make it sound reasonably okay on the Genesis's FM Synth, PSG, and DAC combo. Feel free to let me know what you think of it after you've heard it. I'll probably stick that up on my music channel later this week. Now, first up, a strong recommendation. As soon as you launch the game in your emulator of choice, go ahead and enable 6-button control in that emulator if it's not already enabled. If you've already tried the game and the controls went nuts, well, that's probably why. Because if you have the controller mode set to 6-button in-game but 3-button on the emulator, what you'll see are things like you'll press a direction and it'll also act like you're pressing one of the A, B, or C buttons. So if that happened to you, well, now you know why. Now you can also change the game to 3-button control with the start menu in-game itself, but you'll really want to use the 6-button support here for the best experience. I'll also note that I tried the game on Genesis Plus DX and Pico Drive via RetroArch. On Pico Drive, I got an instant crash, but I imagine most of you are probably not using Pico Drive anymore anyway. Now, I want to try this game on my Mr. Pi, I just haven't had the time, folks. I tried to squeeze it in, but my life has been one personal crisis after another for the last few months. Seriously, it's been almost comical. But I know you're not here to hear about my insane personal life, so let's stick to Metal Gear on the Genesis. So the default 6-button control scheme works like this. B and C cover your primary actions such as punching and firing a weapon, while X, Y, and Z open the transceiver, equipment menu, and weapon menus respectively. In the original MSX version of the game, you had to use the keyboard to open the menus, and it made it kind of a pain to play. This alone in the Genesis version makes the gameplay experience much nicer. And for the transceiver, when you open it, to switch frequencies, you use left and right on the D-pad, and then you can call or receive with up or down on the D-pad, though receiving usually happens automatically. Now, occasionally I find the receiving text goes away a little fast, but other than that, everything is nice and easy to handle here. Using items can occasionally be a little bit tricky. For some items, you just enable them by highlighting them and then leaving the item screen. That's what you do for things like key cards, the gas mask, and other items that don't require specifically being activated. For some other items like the scope, you have to press a button to enable it and then cancel out of it when you're finished. For things like rations, you have to actively use those as well. New to this version of the game is when you press start, you get a save and load game menu. It has 5 slots and it will show you an asterisk next to your most recent save. This is super handy for anyone that intends to play on real hardware. It also seems to work like a true save option, unlike the save option in the MSX game, which really seemed to only save at elevators at checkpoints, and it only keep track of what you did until the point you entered the last elevator. So what I'm going to do next here is basically give you a preview of the game for a few minutes. I'll note that as soon as I have the download link for this version of the game, it'll be available in the description for this video. Chances are by the time you see this, it's already there, but if it's not there yet, it will be soon. So here's our opening scene, and NES fans will find that it's quite different from the opening in that version of the game. It's much more similar to what we'd later see in Metal Gear Solid, the PlayStation entry that really exploded the popularity of the series. You can tell the music sounds considerably different in this version of the game versus the MSX original, and I think it all sounds great. Now I'll note that I did not do any of the main exploration songs, so I'm not praising myself here. Now, the portraits in the transceiver are also updated and quite a bit different than the original, and I'll show you some comparisons in just a little bit. If you're somehow unfamiliar with Metal Gear, it's a stealth action game where your main goal is to infiltrate the enemy's base without being spotted by any of the enemy soldiers or surveillance equipment. When you do get spotted, and trust me, you will, you'll get rushed by a bunch of enemies and you'll be stuck in alert status until you clear them out. Now, alert status stays active until you kill all enemies once the alert has been enabled. It doesn't end just because you leave a room in this version of the game. So that was true in both the MSX original and also this Genesis port. So this means that alert status will follow you from one room to another in almost every case. Now, if you're wondering if you can still leave and re-enter rooms to stock up on rations and ammunition in this version, yep, you sure can. The maximums are the same as the original, so for rations you can carry up to 3 at a time, and for weapons, the amount of ammunition you can carry depends on your star rating at the time. Your star rating goes up as you rescue prisoners, just as in the original. Let's do a little comparison here for a moment between the MSX2 original version of Metal Gear and this new Genesis port. Now, you might think that it doesn't look any different from the original MSX version at all. And for the most part, sure, it's really close. But one nicety of the Genesis version of Metal Gear is that it does run at 60 frames per second instead of 30 like the MSX original. The Genesis version here also doesn't slow down at all. For the MSX version, it tended to slow down when a lot of things got on screen. So here's a look at a few other areas real quick, and yeah, you can see the Genesis version is really close to the source material. If you're wondering how the NES version is different, that's been covered in a lot of other videos here on YouTube and out there on the old interwebs, but I will sum it up very quickly for you. There are some new scenes outside in the jungle, including the opening area in that one where Snake is airdropped instead of swimming into the base. While many of the rooms are laid out the same in both versions of the game, the NES version takes a lot of liberties, removing some enemies from some rooms and completely changing the layout of other rooms. There are a lot of places in NES Metal Gear where you just cannot avoid being detected at all. But it barely matters, because alert status on the NES ends as soon as you leave the current room you're in, which means that being spotted has almost no consequences unless you're near the middle of a room. Some of the music is also completely different in the NES version of the game. And here's just a very quick peek at how some of the scenes on the NES compare to the Genesis port. So you might be wondering, is this game finished? And yes, apart from maybe some minor bug fixes, this game is finished and playable all the way through to the end. Hoffman has actually been sitting on this for a while because, oddly enough, he couldn't find anyone to finish up the music for it. Now, it's possible you still might encounter the odd bug or two, but for the most part, this game is perfectly playable, and I'd go so far as to say it's probably the best way to play the original Metal Gear for right now. I'll also note that Hoffman just updated the game yesterday to correct a few known bugs, but I'd say even during my playthrough here on a slightly older version, I only encountered a few problems, mainly related to the boss music sometimes switching to the regular exploration music track. Now, what is this game not? Well, if you're looking for a fancy 16-bitified version of Metal Gear with a graphical upgrade akin to something like Super Mario All-Stars, well, this ain't that. Now, I want to stress, this is the MSX version of Metal Gear with some quality of life improvements and a nice new FM soundtrack. It also includes a few different translations of the game. In fact, it has the same versions that were included in Hoffman's earlier Amiga port. So we've got the original Japanese version, we've got the European English release that was contemporary from back in the day, we've got the updated fan translation, and it also includes the newer Spanish translation. So if you're a fan of Metal Gear Solid and never experienced the very first game in the series, I'd say this is a great way to play it. Metal Gear may be a little archaic and sometimes cryptic by today's standards though, so some modern gamers may find it a little tough to deal with. How so, you may wonder, you wondering wanderer? Well, for instance, you can only damage some bosses with specific weapons. And here's a free hint or two. Use landmines on the tank and standard rockets, not remote-controlled ones, on the Arnolds. If you get stuck, just look at a FAQ or walkthrough for the MSX version of the game, and you'll find the solution you need to continue making progress. Now, I mentioned Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake near the beginning of the video, and I know a lot of people are seeing this and probably wondering if Hoffman has any plans to port that absolutely amazing game over to the Genesis. I did my due diligence and asked them about it, and the answer is nope. But allow me to elaborate. You see, the original MSX2 Metal Gear was completely disassembled by Manuel Pezos. Hoffman pointed out that disassembly is a long process and the original Metal Gear was only 128 kilobytes, while the MSX sequel, Solid Snake, is 512 kilobytes. He was able to port the disassembled Z80 code from the original over to the 68000 when he did his Amiga port a few years back. Now, the Genesis version of Metal Gear, as I mentioned earlier, is based on that work he did for the Amiga release. Now, aside from having a link for the Genesis download when available, I'll also put up a link to Hoffman's Amiga port of Metal Gear, which has some interesting info on how that game came to be. So to wrap things up here, I think it's absolutely awesome that Metal Gear is now on the Genesis with some nice updates, and everyone should appreciate the work that's gone into making this game happen. Now, if you ask me what I'd like to see in an ideal world, I think there are a few more things that could shake a bit of the rust off the original Metal Gear. And these are problems with the original game, not with the port. Now, it's still a really good game and fun to play through even today, but as I mentioned a little earlier, it is a bit archaic. So one nice change will be to have doors open automatically as long as you have the right keycard in your inventory without you having to manually select it as your active item. That alone would be a huge quality of life improvement to any version of Metal Gear. And there are actually ROM hacks that do this, among other things, for both the NES and MSX2 versions of Metal Gear. Now, something else that I think would be cool to see, and I'm thinking pie in the sky here, is for someone to maybe play around with the visuals of the game and maybe make a hack to make it look a little bit more Genesis-y. I mean, it'd be cool to see the aesthetic updated to more closely resemble the Metal Gear Solid titles. Maybe give Snake his iconic sneaking suit and give the backgrounds a little more personality. And don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form. These are just things that would be cool to see. But what we have already is extremely cool even without a single change and definitely worth playing all the way through to the end. I highly encourage everyone to give it a shot. If you grew up playing the NES version of Metal Gear and never played the MSX original, I think you'll especially like and appreciate the Genesis version of the game. If you were a fan of the MSX original, the new soundtrack and smoother visuals definitely make it more appealing to play through than that version. If you've never played the original Metal Gear at all, as I said earlier, I think this is probably now the most convenient and best way to experience that game. Alright, so tell me folks, what do you think? Have you already tried the port of Metal Gear for the Genesis? Did you like it? What's your favorite version of the original game? Do you like the much maligned NES version? Tell me all about it in the comments. And feel free to try the game, come back here and leave a comment afterwards if you've just discovered it through this video. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss any of my videos. If you want to support the work that I do here, including creating music for new retro games like this one, please support my channel on Patreon, Ko-fi, or right here on YouTube through things like Super Thanks or channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.